Our next presenter is Yarira Resendez. Yarira is a professional engineer for the Technical Review and Oversight Team, or TROT, in the Plan and Technical Review section of the TCEQ Water Supply Division. Yarira graduated with a Bachelor of Science in Civil Engineering from Texas A&M University, Kingsville, and attained her master's degree in Civil Engineering from the University of Texas at Austin. Yarira has worked for the TCEQ TROT since 2013, where she reviews exceptions to the 30 TAC Subchapter D requirements and provides technical assistance to public water system representatives. In her off time, Yarira enjoys gardening, hiking, and camping at our state parks and her family. Please welcome Yarira Resendez.
Hi, good afternoon. I am going to be speaking about PFAS, the upcoming PFAS regulations, and treatment technologies that the EPA has identified as best available technologies. And in addition to that, we will go through our approval process, a TCEQ approval process for systems that want to propose innovative treatment for PFAS removal. What my presentation will quickly cover is we'll give a brief discussion on what PFAS are. Matt Monroe did a really great presentation yesterday and gave a really good background on the chemicals and upcoming compliance for the new rule that just came out this April. I will also talk about the treatment technologies listed by the EPA for PFAS removal and our TCEQ approval process for each of those. PFAS has been this word that's been thrown around much more recently over the last few years in terms of treatment and its health effects on the humans and animals. And so a quick background on PFAS is this is a chemical that has been developed and has been in the industry and in consumer products since the 1940s and 50s. This chemical was specifically designed to act as a surfactant and to be used in non-stain or non-stick and stain repellent products, and also has been used in military Air Force bases as firefighting foams. Some of the more common names that have been associated with PFAS are Teflon and Scotch Guard. So these were chemicals that have been used since the 40s and 50s in consumer products, and also in food products such as lining for popcorn bags. So it's been around for quite a while, and because it is very soluble and very persistent, PFAS has been found in soil, in water, in the air, and also in human blood. So this is, there's been toxicology reports and research on that, which led the EPA to regulate this as a contaminant. So this image right here shows basically the entire family of PFAS chemicals that have been found to date. And those yellow boxes with the red arrows pointing at them are the 6 PFAS chemicals that will be regulated by the EPA. So as you can see, there are many types of species of PFAS, and they're still finding more as the tests become available to actually find them. Typically in treatment and in research, the PFAS characteristics will be related to the structure and the chemical composition of the actual chemical. And what that means is basically how many carbons there are in the carbon fluoride bond that creates each of these, or what each of these are comprised of. So typically they're categorized into 2 categories. One are long-chain PFAS, which typically means that the PFAS chain has more than 7 carbons tied to it. And then you also have a category of short-chain PFAS, which is you have 6 or less carbons in your bond, or in the short chain. As Matt had mentioned yesterday, the long-chain PFAS do tend to have a longer half-life in the human body than short-chain PFAS. This is important because when we talk about treatment for PFAS, you'll see that some technologies are more effective or are better for removing long chain than short chain. So it's kind of important to make this distinction early on to see which treatments are available depending on what type of PFAS you have in your water. And so here is as Matt showed yesterday as well, these are the 6 PFAS that are currently being regulated. And these are the final MCLs that have been proposed and pushed through by the EPA. And so there's 6 actual PFAS compounds, 5 that have their own specific MCL, which are the first 5 on that table. And then the last is a health index, which is kind of a mix of concentrations of all these other shorter chain PFAS. And if you exceed the health index of 1, then you are not in compliance with meeting that part of the MCL. And one of the things that I know a question was raised yesterday about the fact that EPA is regulating this to the parts per trillion. And so kind of wanted to provide a visual to show you guys what exactly 1 part per trillion looks like. And so 1 part per trillion is about a water drop in 18 million gallons of water. And so I got a picture of a storage tank that's about 4.5 million gallons. And so if you put 4 of those together, that's 18 million gallons. And 1 part per trillion is 1 drop in all of those 4 tanks combined. If you have 4 or 5 drops, then you're exceeding the MCL for some of these PFAS. The good news is that PFAS has been phased out. There has been history and legal precedents with the EPA where 3M and DuPont decided to begin phasing out PFOA and PFAS in their products, ultimately at some point where they begin to not make that anymore. And unfortunately, we hear Gen X, and Gen X PFAS chemicals were actually created as a replacement for the longer chain legacy PFAS, and those did not come out to be as healthy as well. And so now the short chain, which are 2 of those, and the Gen X chemicals do have their own MCL as well. So with the rule language that was put out by EPA, the language in the regulation also explained that the EPA has identified 3 treatment technologies that are known as best available technologies for removing PFAS from drinking water or your source water. And so the 3 of these is granulator activated carbon, or GAC, anion exchange, IX, and reverse osmosis, RO. And one of the first questions that you get asked is, which is the best one that I can use? And really the treatment that you're going to pick is going to be specific on your source water, the concentration of PFAS that you have in your water, how many, and a categorization of whether that's mostly short chain or long chain. And it also will depend on cost and footprint as well. So there are a lot of considerations that systems will need to think about when they begin evaluating some sort of treatment technology to remove PFAS. So the first one that I'm going to talk about is GAC, granulator activated carbon. Most of you are very familiar with this type of treatment technology. It's used in, surface water filtration for the most part. And granulator activated carbon can also be used point of use, point of entry at your home to just remove some contaminants, some salts, chlorine. But this has also been shown to be pretty effective in removing some types of PFAS compounds, and it's mostly effective through the adsorption process. And so essentially what ends up happening is as PFAS moves through a vessel that has GAC contained in it, the longer chain is mostly effective for longer and short chain, but a lot of that is the polarity of these chemicals and these compounds will stick to the surface of GAC. And so it's one of the most researched treatment technologies out there and can be one of the most cost-effective, and it is one that most systems are familiar with. And so the way that GAC is used for PFAS treatment technology is it could either be used as a filter absorber, which I will talk about in the next slide, or as a post-filter contactor. Those are type of the 2 terminologies that you will hear in terms of GAC treatment for PFAS. There are also pressure filters if you're using GAC under pressure, and there's been several case studies out there where GAC has been evaluated in these pressure vessels operated in series or in parallel. And GAC can be used to treat PFAS that is found in groundwater or in surface water. So the first category, I guess if you want to call it that, of how GAC is used as a filter absorption is typically what ends up happening is your filter beds in your surface water plant, you start replacing some of the media in your filters with GAC. So it could be a replacement for, say, anthracite, or it could just be an additional level, a bed of media that you have to address PFAS treatment. And typically, because these are filter galleries, this treatment is considered to be gravity fed. So this is an application in how GAC can be used, say, at a conventional surface water treatment plant as a filter absorber. Now, I will note, we'll talk about approvals. You can't just go into your plant and just take everything out and put GAC in and call it a day. You will still need to get approval from the TCEQ to use that type of application just to ensure that a lot of the design characteristics specific for PFAS removal are reviewed and approved by us. And so we'll talk about that in the next couple of slides. The other way that GAC is used is as a post-filter contactor, and that could either be a gravity-fed or it could be a pressure vessel with GAC. But typically, these are located after your treatment process, kind of as a finisher to try to go ahead and remove any high levels of PFAS that you have in your water. And this is an example of a post-filter contactor for groundwater. The two slides I showed previously, or the slide I showed previously, were just examples for surface water. But in terms of GAC in groundwater, this is what it would typically look like. And they're used as a post-filter contactor, typically right after treatment. The pictures that you show here, the one on the left is an example of a gravity-fed post-filter contactor for a groundwater plant. And the one to the right shows two pressure filters, or pressure vessels used at a groundwater plant for PFAS removal. So this is just a visual to show like this is what some of these treatments actually look like out in the field in practice. And so a lot of the research and studies are showing that GAC can be really effective for the removal of your long-chain PFAS. And there is moderate removal of the short-chain compounds. Adding some of these pressure vessels or filter systems, they may not take as much of a good print, so that's a good advantage for using GAC if you have limited space in your plant but need to have this treatment put in. A lot of these vessels do not require a very large footprint. Using GAC for PFAS removal will also give you some advantages in removing additional constituents for taste and odor, and for dissolved organic carbons and total organic carbons as well. There will also be a likely impact on corrosivity using GAC, so that is also another advantage to consider. One of the things that is asked is what are some of the interferences using GAC for PFAS removal? And what we've seen in the studies is your DOC and especially your TOC levels is what that will make or break using GAC, because those type of analytes will tend to compete with PFAS to get absorbed by GAC itself. So analyzing your source water is going to be really important to ensure that you don't have some of these other analytes that might compete with PFAS and trying to get to the actual GAC through absorption. So that being said, for systems that want to use GAC either through gravity or post-filter or through conventional, replacing your filter bed in your surface water plant, these treatment technologies will require an exception for innovative alternate treatment under the rule listed here. And these requirements will encompass the system providing data from a pilot study to approve the technology for removing PFAS. Exceptions for the use of these treatments will be required before plan review submittal. So just to think ahead, if this is one of the technologies that you want to use, keep in mind that there will be some pilot study data that will need to be submitted for approval, and that you will need to go through the exceptions process before getting that treatment approved through the plan review process. So what would an exception look like, or the approval look like? Well, first, we would need to submit a pilot study protocol for approval, and a protocol is basically a plan of how you're going to conduct this experiment to see if this particular treatment technology is going to work for your source water. And so the approval process will consist of sending us a copy of that protocol. The TCEQ will review that under the exceptions process and will approve the protocol. And at that point, you will go ahead and conduct your study. You will collect your data and your results and summarize that and send that to us in a report for us to review for final approval. And once that exception after that pilot study is granted, then at that point is when you can go to the plan review process and get plans and specifications approved for your treatment. So now we're moving on from GAC to ion exchange. This is the second technology that the EPA has listed as the best alternative technology or best technology. And I'm not sure how many of you are here familiar with ion exchange, but we've seen this treatment technology for removing arsenic, removing nitrates, and some other constituents in groundwater. And so the way that ion exchange works is basically you also have a type of vessel with, instead of GAC in there, you would have a PFAS-specific resin or a resin that has been designed for PFAS removal. And the way that that works is just through positive and negative ions that are in the water, and the resin will attract the PFAS chemicals through the absorption process with the ion exchange resin that's designed for PFAS removal. So there are some that have been developed. There's either they're categorized into a weak base or a strong base type of resin, but there are several companies out there that do have PFAS resins for ion exchange, and some have already been in use in other states in this country where PFAS is already a state-regulated chemical. And so one of the important design parameters that really needs to be figured out when you're doing a pilot scales test is determining the depth of ion exchange resin that you're going to need, and then some design operating parameters such as empty bed contact time that will be sufficient for removing PFAS. And so very similar to GAC, as water goes through your column with the PFAS resin in there, the PFAS compounds will absorb or stick to the resin. But much like GAC, there are going to be some competing anions that will fight with PFAS to absorb itself to the resin. And so some of those are listed here, just nitrate, bicarbonate, and sulfate. And the amount of, or the depth of resin that you're going to need for effective removal is going to depend on your empty bed contact time. And so this visual to the right of the slide kind of gives you an idea of what we mean by empty bed contact time. And that is the length of time that your water goes from the beginning to the very bottom of the vessel, so the amount of time that the water is in contact with that resin as it passes through the vessel. And so if you have longer empty bed contact times, odds are you will have better removal efficiencies because there is just more time that the water is passing through the resins. One of the good things about ion exchange is, and one of the advantages is that it actually is shown to be successful for removing those short-chain PFAS. So whereas GAC may not be as effective for short chains, ion exchange has shown to be pretty successful. And so this is where, again, characterizing your source water to see which is your more competing PFAS chemical and whether it's short chain or long chain is really important when you're trying to pick out a treatment. One of the downfalls with using ion exchange has been disposing of regeneration waste. And so this is an area of research that's also been conducted in terms of how do you dispose waste from these ion exchange vessels, either through disposal or incineration. So that's one of the other areas right now that's been doing some research is finding a safe way to dispose of the spent media from these treatment technologies. Here is an example of what ion exchange looks like out in the field for treatment. There's that picture that's on the left, and this is a groundwater treatment plant in California, and this is touted to be one of the largest ion exchange treatment systems out there for PFAS. And so you can see all of those pressure filters outside, and that's what they're treating, they're using to treat their groundwater. And then on the other side is another example of an ion exchange system in Colorado at the city of Fountain. Again, these are depending on how many you need. It may take a very large footprint of your system, or it may not. But this is just some of the case studies that have also been out there for using ion exchange for PFAS removal. And so similar to the use of GAC for PFAS, the use of ion exchange for PFAS removal is also going to require an exception before you submit plans and specifications. And again, similar to the GAC process, it would entail submitting a pilot scale protocol for our review, and then conducting the experiment and collecting your data in a report for our approval. And once that final exception is approved, which will list a lot of the operating parameters that were validated during the study, and then at that point is when you would submit plans and specifications for approval. And so now moving over to reverse osmosis RO for PFAS removal. And I think a lot of systems may be more familiar with RO. It's typically used for treating brackish water, but it has shown to be very effective in removing PFAS because it could pretty much remove anything. So it has been effective to attack both or remove both long chain and short chain PFAS. And really, it's through size exclusion, and that's the primary mechanism of removal is just because of nanofiltration and how small those filters actually are. Reverse osmosis has been used whenever GAC or ion exchange replacement has been too frequent. Like if you have really high concentration of PFAS and you end up finding that using GAC or ion exchange would require you to change out or regenerate your media frequently to the point where it's not cost effective. And this is when some systems will turn over to RO to go ahead and have that be a treatment to exclude both your long chain and your short chain PFAS compounds. And here's some more pictures. I did not name names, but these are two water treatment plants in Texas. And so this just kind of shows you what RO modules will look in a treatment plant. And so it would be very similar to what you're seeing here for PFAS removal. And lucky for you guys, if you propose to use RO for PFAS removal, we will not require an exception for that. It will only require plan review approval, and plan review does have, the state, or we have actual rules specific to RO for the use of treatment in subchapter 290 rules. And so for what that would look like is it would also entail a two-step approval through the plan review team, where you would first submit a submittal for construction review and approval, and that would include providing an engineering report and plans and specifications of your design. And your step 2 approval will be once you're ready to request use actually use the treatment. And at that point, it would entail an engineering report, some baseline data, and then some chemical analysis from the raw water and from the permeate. And the plan review team does have checklists available online that goes through the approval process for using RO. And so they do have a step 1 checklist and a step 2 checklist. And there's the link here, or you can just do a quick Google search for TCEQ RO plan review process, and you should be able to find these checklists. Now, this next slide, sourcing from Thomas Beth, who is a researcher with the EPA, and this is from one of his ASDRA webinar series in 2024. So I relied on the expert to kind of give us some numbers here in terms of the effectiveness of using GAC, ion exchange, and RO for PFAS. He also listed, I know there are questions about PAC use, and so I believe that there are some studies out there that show that PAC, it may be effective, but the amount and the dose that you would need to achieve removal can be pretty high and not really cost effective for some systems. Some of the treatments that are ineffective is conventional treatment, low pressure membranes, which is our MF, UF, your microfiltration or ultrafiltration membranes, which are not nanofiltration. Those haven't been shown to be very effective just because of size exclusion, and those the PFAS compounds are just too small. Biological treatments such as slow sand filtration has not been shown to be effective, as well as disinfection, oxidation, and advanced oxidation. And some of the treatments that Mr. Speth listed here that to be effective, first one is ion exchange, and it shows that it has about 90 to 99% removal effectiveness. High pressure membranes, which is RO, also shows to be about 93 to 99% effective. As you can see here with PAC, 10 to 97% effective, so that's a really wide range. So it's only effective for select applications. And then GAC, if you're using CAC conventionally, it won't be as effective. You do have to select your specific granular size for your GAC depth, depending on empty bed contact time. So basically using GAC that's designed for PFAS, and when it is designed specifically for PFAS removal, it does show to be effective 89 to above 98%. There's also been an introduction of novel technologies for the use of, for PFAS removal. So these are outside of GAC, ion exchange, and RO that the EPA has listed as best available technologies. But nonetheless, these are innovative technologies that companies are trying to see if it can be effective for PFAS removal. So some of these resins or technologies are carbon-based sorbents. There's also the use of foam fractionation, which I kind of read up on it, and it's a type of physical separation process, which doesn't seem to be very practical just first thinking about it, but it is something that there has been and there is research on these type of novel technologies just to have more options for other systems. And so if in the event that a public water system would like to use a novel technology for PFAS removal, then that would have to go through the exceptions process before the approval of plans and specifications. Review timelines are different for exception requests and plan reviews. Exception requests are subject to a 100-day review period. And once you have your exceptions completed, approved, and you're ready to go through the plan approval process, then that plan approval process is a 60-day review period. If, for example, you're using RO and you only need to go to plan review, then you basically cut out that 100-day exception review period and you have a 60-day review period with plan review team. And as mentioned, because it is in the rule, all exceptions that are required for your project have to be approved before you can submit your plans and specifications to plan review. So what can you do right now? Matt spoke yesterday about compliance schedules and deadlines. And so I know a lot of people are starting to wake up and they're starting to realize that this is coming down the chain and there's really not much you can do about it, but get ready. So best thing that you can do is to begin to arm yourself with knowledge and get to know what these PFAS treatment technologies look like. Start talking to other systems in your area that might be subject to PFAS contamination if you happen to find some of your system, or if you have a groundwater system, you might want to find another groundwater system about your size, same source water, and get a feel for what those guys are doing to begin addressing this incoming regulation, and how they're planning to implement some sort of treatment for PFAS if it is needed. In the interim, EPA does have a lot of resources handy on their website, and they're free. And here's some screenshots of some of those websites. And so one is a drinking water treatability database. And this database actually holds database and treatment data from other states that are using different technologies to remove PFAS. So here's one resource where you can start reading into what other states are doing and get a feel for what are some of these empty bed contact times that they're using for GAC, if this is what I want to use. There are also cost models. So there's research or a resource there to try to get a feel for, if you decide you might have 2 or 3 treatments that you want to try out. There are cost models with the EPA to give you an idea of how costly it will be to implement those treatments. And there are also treatment models that can be used for engineers to try to figure out whether that specific treatment that they zeroed in will actually be effective, and then begin to try to get a feel for the design parameters for that particular treatment. So this is a screenshot of their cost models and overview of technologies that EPA has listed for all drinking water treatment. So it would just need to go in and filter for PFAS. And then here's an example of the drinking water treatability database from the EPA. And each of those slides, I didn't get to see this, but if you have you can also just search EPA WBS, and that will be one of the first links to pop up on your search. Or you could, for the drinking water treatability database, you can also search EPA DWTB. All right, and that's all I have. And I don't know if I have time for questions, but if I do, I'd be happy to answer them if I can.
Yes, after the approval process is done, does TCEQ have a protocol or procedure where they follow up with that approved process to see if it is sustained that treatment process, the percentage of reduction that we're looking for?
So eventually, that's essentially what the pilot study would do. The pilot study is basically experimenting the treatment technology on site and actually using your source water as the experiment source. And so that typically will result in a pilot study report with data where we have, during the study, there's a lot of data that will need to be collected just to ensure that the treatment itself is reducing your level of PFAS to below the MCL. And so that's basically how systems will verify that their technology or the treatment that they decided has worked is through the pilot study process. As far as follow-up, if it doesn't work, it will most likely be found through the compliance area if there's chemical sampling and there's exceedances. Or if the system is typically with the exceptions process, we will impose more frequent monitoring downstream of the treatment to ensure it's still working. And so some of that more frequent monitoring will indicate if there's breakthrough or if regeneration might need to be happening much sooner than you need to because you're starting to see levels of PFAS that are higher than what your goal is.
I'm going to go back to the beginning on this because I missed that yesterday. Are PFAS new in the water?
No, though. As I mentioned, PFAS, I was actually watching a documentary yesterday on Netflix that I watched years ago that's called The Devil You Know, or Devil We Know. And this was a chemical that was created by 3M back in the 40s and 50s, and we had companies use them in cookware, in Scotch Guard.
So they've been in our water forever and ever.
There has been litigation, farmers that have found their cattle to be dead because they were drinking water downstream of those chemical plants. So it has been in the water and it's very soluble. So not only is it in the water, it's also in the soil and in the air for many 50, 60 years now.
It's just a wonder that we're not all dead already.
So are any of these treatment technologies just in a discussion amongst your group and the scientists or professionals that are looking at it? Do they also apply or provide benefit for treatment of trihalomethanes when they may be high in the system as well? So you can at least get both of them captured with one? You mentioned GAC. That
right, and I mean, it can. And the thing is trying to prioritize which contaminant you're actually wanting to remove. For some systems that may want to remove multiple contaminants, let's say PFAS and arsenic through ion exchange, this is where it may require operating your vessels in series. So it goes through several levels of treatment to ensure that if the first media is spent with saying the media attracted most of the PFAS compounds, your second train could address some of these other anions that are competing with PFAS for absorption through a second or a third treatment train or vessel. So I'm sure that it can be used, but the majority of the studies that have been honed in with the EPA has been specific for PFAS removal. And remember that some of these resins are designed for PFAS removal, so you might see some constituents being removed, but that may not be the goal for that particular resin in that application.
You mentioned the competitive sites on granular activated carbon and anion exchange. Do you know if the EPA documents that talk about cost and treatment technologies address that? And then even as importantly, does it address the disposal of regenerants or, your products, your granular activated carbon or your waste stream? Does it talk about the cost and what to do about that?
So the models that I had shown, there is a specific model that gives you an idea of the cost of your treatment. So the EPA has developed like some financial models that's available on their website to get a feel for your actual cost from start to finish and regeneration cost depending on the treatment you pick. For the issue of disposal, what the EPA has done back in April of 2024, PFOA and PFAS were designated under CERCLA as hazardous substances, so that's kind of the Superfund area. And so to help systems address that, the EPA has released an interim guidance on disposal for PFAS waste that can be either through the wastewater treatment plant or through the drinking water process. And so there is a manual interim guidance that's available for free by the EPA, and they have some interim guidance for systems that are starting to want to learn about disposal and what are some of the more effective technologies for disposing your spent media or your waste stream that has this large concentration of PFAS.
So we have two sources of water. We have groundwater and we have purchased surface water. We've been running tests on both so far. Looks like the groundwater's clear, but we're getting the chemicals from the purchased surface water. So whose responsibility is it going to be to take care of? Is it the purchased, or if they decide not to do anything, will we still have to do something?
Well, if you are purchasing your water from, say, a large wholesaler that's a public water system, they will also be subject to the same requirements. And so the amount of water, or the water quality of their treated water that they're sending through their entry point and through their customers also will need to meet the MCLs for PFAS. So they would be responsible as a wholesaler to ensure that the water that they're sending to their purchase customers is meeting all drinking water standards, and that would include PFAS as well. All right, thank you.
Thank you, Liz.